Hello Synapse community, my name is Ryan Majidimehr and I'm a product manager on the Azure Synapse Analytics team. Today is the third episode in our series on Azure Synapse and Power BI Datamart, how they work together and complement each other to cover a broad range of analytics scenarios. You might remember last month we talked about Lakehouse, how you can use Datamarts to pull a subset of data from your Lakehouse for self-service analytics. Today we're going to be talking about data warehousing, how you can use Datamart in conjunction with your Synapse data warehouse. As is tradition in this series, I'm joined by Pawel Potasinski. Can hand it over to him. Pawel, welcome. Tell us about data warehousing.
Thank you, Ryan. Let's start with what a data warehouse is. You can consider a data warehouse as a central repository of integrated data from different data sources, storing current and historical data in a single place and used for serving as a single version of truth for workers throughout the enterprise. For example, for creating analytical reports. Modern data warehouses can handle not only relational data, but also semi-structured and non-structured data stored in a data lake. Azure Synapse Analytics allows you to develop a data warehouse end-to-end. First, you can use Synapse pipelines with over 100 connectors to ingest the data from a variety of platforms and load this data into your staging area, which can be a data lake. Then you can transform the data and load it into the data warehouse structures like fact and dimension tables, using your preferred technologies like SQL, Spark, or maybe low-code visually designed data flows. Optionally, you can use the same technologies to offload the data from a data warehouse into a data lake, for example, for archiving or cost optimization purposes. When your warehouse is ready to serve the data for analytics and reporting, you can build a set of Power BI data marts and load them with departmentally or domain-oriented subsets of data from your warehouse for self-service analytics and external data sharing.
Can you show us what a data warehouse like that might look like in Azure Synapse and how we might load data into it?
Sure, let me walk you through the schema of a sample data warehouse and discuss its typical characteristics. Here I have my sample wildword importers data warehouse. It's a relational database powered by Azure Synapse dedicated SQL pool, a collection of analytic resources that are provisioned for this specific SQL database. This is quite a typical data warehouse. It has some dimension tables storing the textual descriptors of the business and some fact tables storing the numerical performance measurements of the business. Now let's take a closer look at this data warehouse by connecting to it with SQL Server Management Studio and running some SQL queries. A typical dimension table looks like the dim supplier table I used in this query. It has an integer surrogate key that uniquely identifies each entity in the dimension table, regardless of its natural source key, which can store duplicate values for different versions of the same entity. Then the table contains textual descriptors like supplier's name and category. Note that this table is denormalized and the values in descriptive columns may repeat many times. This is intentional in dimensional modeling. Duplicate values can be perfectly compressed by analytical engines. Also, notice two columns valid from and valid to, which are used to turn dim supplier into a slowly changing dimension type 2 that stores and manages dimension data over time in a data warehouse. Whenever a new version of the existing entity arrives to the warehouse, the old version row is marked as inactive by feeding in the valid to column with specific date, and the new version row is added with valid to column left as null. Unlike a dimension table, the fact table usually contains almost exclusively numerical values. Surrogate keys taken from the dimension tables associated with the business area described by this particular fact table, and the measures that describe business performance for that area. Azure Synapse dedicated SQL pool leverages a scale-out architecture to distribute computational processing of data across multiple nodes. The data is shared into distributions to optimize the performance of the system. A well-designed data warehouse built on this architecture can provide very high performance, even for tables with billions of rows. Here is a sample analytical query that runs on top of a fact sale table with over 1 billion rows. Notice that the query executes in milliseconds. When defining your tables in such data warehouse, you can choose one of the 3 sharding patterns to distribute the data. Let's look at some table definitions for more details. A hash-distributed table can deliver the highest query performance for joins and aggregations on large tables. To shard data into a hash-distributed table, a hash function is used to deterministically assign each row to one distribution. One of the columns is designated as the distribution column. The hash function uses the values in the distribution column to assign each row to a distribution. For example, for this large fact table, I chose WWI invoice ID column because I know it will be heavily used for joins with other tables. A round-robin distributed table distributes data evenly across the table, but without any further optimization. It's the simplest table to create and delivers fast performance when used as a staging table for loads. You can also use this distribution pattern when there is no good candidate for the hash column. A replicated table has a full copy of the table available on every compute node of a dedicated SQL pool. Queries run fast on replicated tables because joins on replicated tables don't require data movement. Replication requires extra storage, which makes it impractical for large tables. Now that we've looked at the data warehouse from the inside, let's see how to load data into it. One of the easiest ways is to use the options available in Synapse Studio. Let's say I want to quickly load a file from a data lake into my warehouse. To do this, I go to the Linked tab in the Data Hub, navigate to my data lake, open the Data Lake Explorer and find the file that I'm interested in. Now I just need to right-click the file and select New SQL Script Bulk Load. At this point, Synapse Studio detects the file format and suggests the options that I can use to load the contents of the file into the data warehouse. I can change these options, for example, knowing that the file contains column headings. I can also preview the data and see how the data will look like after applying the selected options. The last thing is to choose the name for the new table that I will load the data into. Let me name this table DBO stage region. When I click Open Script, I will get a SQL script. After execution of the script, the data from the file will be loaded into the new table. So I may simply execute the whole script. And then when I come back to the workspace view and I refresh my tables view, I can see that the new stage region table is listed on a table list. Now, this is also a great way to learn the copy command, which allows you to quickly load the data from a data lake into the warehouse. Copy command is one of the most efficient ways to load the data into a data warehouse. However, keep in mind it's not the only option you have. Let me switch to the Integrate Hub and open a sample pipeline. This pipeline executes a data flow which loads a new data into a dim supplier dimension table and implements the necessary logic required to handle slowly changing dimension type 2. The top path detects if the new data rows match rows existing in the dimension table. If the row is new, it's automatically added to the table. If the new row matches an existing active row in a table, then two things happen. The old row gets updated by feeding in the valid to column, and the new row is added with the valid to column set to null. If you are looking for examples of how to implement the pipelines and data flows typical for a data warehouse, check out the Knowledge Center in Synapse Studio. If you go to Browse Gallery, The data integration team prepared a lot of ready-to-use pipelines for you.
Cool. This sounds familiar if you've seen data warehouses before. So, can you use Power BI Datamarts with this data warehouse? For instance, let's say I wanted to serve some domain-oriented tables for a department.
Let me show you how, by connecting Power BI Datamart to the data warehouse I just showed you in Azure Synapse. To get started with Power BI and connect to the data warehouse, I need a dedicated SQL pool endpoint. I can copy it from the properties of my Azure Synapse workspace in the Azure portal. In the Power BI portal, I go to the Premium workspace and create a new data mart. I click Get Data and search for Azure Synapse connector. I select this connector and then I provide the details. A dedicated SQL pool endpoint along with the database name. For the purpose of this demo, I will use a SQL login called Power BI User that is allowed to read the data from my data warehouse, along with the password for this user. After I connect to the warehouse, I can select the tables for my self-service analytics. Let's assume I'm a member of purchasing department. I select fact purchase, fact table, and 3-dimension tables, dim date, dim stock item, and dim supplier. For the purpose of this demo, I won't transform the data using Power Query. But keep in mind, you can do it, for example, to give more meaningful names to the columns in the tables loaded from the data warehouse, or to limit the number of rows from a large fact table. I click Save, and the data from my data warehouse is loaded into the Datamart. Once the data from the warehouse is loaded into Power BI Datamart, I can refine the data model for Power BI reports, for example by adding relationships and measures. Here I have my simple star schema with one fact table and 3 related dimension tables from the data warehouse. Once your data model is ready, you can use Power BI Desktop to connect to your Power BI Datamart and present the data loaded into it from your data warehouse as an interactive report to business users. This sample report allows the purchasing department to track vendor fulfillment efficiency and quickly identify which specific vendors and in what months have failed to fulfill orders on time. As you can see, the pattern we use to connect from Power BI Datamart to the data warehouse is quite simple and practically the same as the one we followed to connect to the lakehouse in the previous episode.
Thanks, Pawel. So to wrap it up, Power BI Datamart works great with Azure Synapse data warehouses. So tell us in the comments, do you use Power BI Datamarts? Do you use Synapse? Well, I hope you use Synapse if you're here. What kind of scenarios do you use it for? Do you use the two of these things together? I would love to hear about it. Again, my name is Ryan Majidimehr. You can find me on Twitter. You can find Synapse on Twitter, Azure_Synapse. You can also find the Azure Synapse Influencer Program on Twitter. It's very fun and exciting. We have a hashtag. We are also on other platforms, other social media platforms. Are there other social media platforms that people use? Tell me in the comments, what social media platforms do you use? I would also love to hear about it. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.